Welcome to the ICS Security Radio Hour half hour with me, Eric.
Me, Dwayne.
Dwayne, guess what? We have a guest today.
I
Shockingly,
know.
someone actually wants to spend time with us. Mary, do you
It's
want to say hi
obviously a
and tell us a
obviously
little
a
about
hobby.
you?
Hi everyone, I'm Mary.
So,
Tell us,
Mary,
tell us how you
thanks
got here,
for,
Mary.
yeah, thanks for joining us. Tell us how you got here.
So, I started in OT security 13 and a half years ago, actually. I was in the emergency management space and I was focused on physical threats, but the issue was becoming more prevalent with cyber physical threats. So, my role kind of shifted and ended up focusing on critical infrastructure. And from there, I absolutely fell in love with the cybersecurity side and went back to school for it. And I've worked in a variety of consulting roles and in house as the global head of OT security for a couple critical manufacturers since then.
Nice. And Mary, what would you like? We generally like to let people talk about what they're interested in and what their kind of spin on the market is. What would you like to talk about today?
I'd love to talk about OT incident response and the differences between IT incident response and OT incident response and how organizations can better prepare themselves if they do encounter an incident.
That is awesome I'll mainly ask that because I don't really have much of experience in that. I've always seen people talk about run books, talk about incident response, talk about playbooks, but I myself have never really been involved in that. Dwayne, have you been involved in an incident response
Well,
before?
I've been involved. So, I mean, we've talked about this a number of times on the podcast. I worked at Cisco. I was involved in a few because, somebody wanted to blame the firewall or whatever. But yeah, my biggest question, I think we're all, well, we might not all be very incident response savvy, but there's plenty of things that you can go out there and read and listen and learn classes about incident response in IT. Would love to hear first and foremost about what Mary mentioned, which is differences. And I guess, my big thing all the time is safety. So, how do we make sure we're in the right place, that we want to restart the plant or whatever it is and be safe, and how that's different from IT. So maybe we'll just throw that floor open to you and say, what's the difference, Mary?
Awesome, yeah. So, as you mentioned, Dwayne, safety is the number one biggest difference. So, everything is done with the lens of safety when responding to an OT incident. Traditional IT incidents, you're more protecting data, and in an OT incident, you're protecting people, processes, and the environment. So, there's very real consequences to a OT cyber incident. You kind of look at the CIA triad and it's flipped. So safety, overarching, but then availability is next, which is key. So you want to make sure that production lines stay up and you're able to do your job and keep the lights on. Also, patching might not be possible. Typical response activities in the IT environment. Containment might not even be possible because you want to make sure that you're looking at everything through that safety lens. And if a process would have to stop or be interrupted and that would impact safety, you're going to prioritize the safety over the actual response itself. So there's creative solutions that you can come up with that, but that's kind of the main general view. And recovery focuses on getting the processes back up and running safely, not just the assets themselves. So you want to
Yeah,
make sure that everything's working as it should.
I guess my somewhat naive look at it is, hey, I reboot the mail server, or I make sure these things aren't infected. But we've got so many things that are so interdependent, and so many it's not just Windows machines, it's all kinds of machines. So how do we kind of make sure everything's clean and then safe? And then of course a startup is, I always go to the most extreme example, which is a dark start of a grid. But there's a lot more to it than just bringing up all the machines all at once, right? There's a lot of dependencies.
Absolutely. So you're wanting you're going to want to do those verifications and those checks to make sure that everything is working as it should. Taking a look at your golden images, golden backups, golden configurations, and making sure that everything matches up. You don't want even a little bit of nuance in those because that could mean a problem either right then or down the road. So you're going to want to make sure that everything is verified to be clean and able.
Okay. But you just said something pretty funny, right? Golden images? I mean, what does that mean? Like they had a backup or something?
Yeah, so you're going to want like just a view.
Oh, that's good. Tell us all about being ready, Mary. Come on. How many people are really ready?
Honestly, I think a lot of organizations have areas to improve with readiness. So some have a start, some have not even started. So the way I look at it is it's more of a tiered system when it comes to OT instant response maturity. So for preparation, that's the most important thing you can do because you want to remain resilient. First step would be building out an OT specific instant response plan. Rather than relying on your IT instant response plan, there's so many differences that need to be brought up. So the safety aspect, the coordination, the people, the decision matrices. A decision in an IT environment will have a very different consequence than in an OT environment. So you want to make sure that those decision makers are identified ahead of time. You also want the structure of the instant response. So oftentimes there's IT, corporate, security, SOC teams, and operations teams. So you want to know exactly how everyone will work together, which you'd outline in an instant response plan. So that would be the first step. Second step I'd recommend.
I'm going to interrupt, of course.
Oh, sure.
So I took the SANS class, I don't know, 3 decades ago, right? The incident, and Ed taught that forever. I don't know if he still does, but the one that stuck with me all the time was something you already mentioned, but I wanted to underline, which is, they have this idea of a person who's actually in charge of the incident response, which is usually relatively high level, like architect or very technical guy. But the thing I've seen, and I'm not going to name any names, is a leader also involved who doesn't maybe get everything that's going on. So it's like, what is that guy's job versus the technical guy's job? And how do we prep maybe somebody who's not real tech savvy to be able to support
Absolutely.
the
That's
thing?
a great question. So the way I look at it, the easiest way to look at it is the instant command system from NIMS. It's been proven to be effective since the 70s. So you have your instant commander, who is someone ideally that can speak the technical language, and then the actual technical leader that's leading the forensics, that's leading the response, would be the operations section chief. So they would report up to the instant commander, and that would be the ideal way to divide those two roles. And if it's someone high level that just doesn't understand the technical, they would sit on the management team, the executive team. So that would be a separate team altogether that helps with some of the handling and decisioning if they are the assigned party to make the decisions, but the technical roles would remain within either that instant commander or the operations section chief.
Now,
And
that's interesting
you've
to me.
done this
So, are
before,
those people
right?
named people in those organizations, or are they much more of is it a named position or is it a named person, like in your experience?
So both. So their title would be different, their day-to-day title, but ideally in that instant response plan, they have, John Smith is the instant commander. Joe Smith is the operations section chief. So you want to actually outline that ahead of time so that people have that awareness. Who do you call when something goes wrong? So it's usually in a chart with folks, and then they have alternatives if the organization is big enough so that, if this incident commander can't do it, then this one comes in. Or if you don't want to be working people 24/7 either, you want to give them a little bit of rest in an incident. So having a backup as well for dividing it up into shifts.
And I assume you also hold your own organizational flexibility, so to speak. When people leave, hey, here's how you
Yes,
fill those roles back in. Here's the right type of person. Here's the wrong type of person. Is that also part of these
exactly.
processes?
Exactly, yes. So making sure that if there is a turnover in place, that that role is filled and that that incident response plan is updated accordingly so that the person that left won't be getting the 3 a.m. call in the middle of the night.
But I assume that I mean, the 3M call is partially also the main responsibility there, right? Like you're going to have someone who's always on site who always makes the call, but there's going to be a person who's going to get that call regardless, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why you do want to keep that incident response plan updated so that a former employee isn't the one getting the call, so that it's the right person, so that you're able to coordinate because every minute counts in an OT incident.
So maybe an overly simplistic question, but like you've done this before, right? You built these for different companies that you work for. So how often did you update that? I mean,
Absolutely. So updates should be done very regularly. So myself, I would update them every 6 months. Some organizations do it annually, some organizations do it on a rolling basis, so it really depends on what the need is. But absolutely, 100%, it should be updated after every exercise. So anytime you do a tabletop, it should be updated. It's a rolling cycle of activities for instant response management because you want to be able to apply whatever you learned in that tabletop to the instant response plan. There's been situations that I've seen where an organization pulls their instant response plan for their OT environment, is walking through an exercise. They say, wait, this isn't how we do it. And they throw out the instant response plan and they just ad hoc the rest of the instant response exercise, which is not good. So you want to make sure that those adjustments are made and that the document is usable because you don't want to be surprised during an incident. Contrary to that, you also want to have the instant response plan updated after an incident. So if there's something when you're responding to an incident that didn't work, same as the exercise, you just want to make sure that you update that response plan accordingly.
Why does that why so you would think like you'd go through the process, and maybe this is part of the process, but like when you say, oh, they're going to just throw it out because it doesn't work and they ad hoc it, like I'd assume, is that because when you start a little more generally, or you start with, good practices based on other companies, and you say, okay, this is how we've done it 10 other times at 10 other places. And then, okay, then we kind of stress test it. We figure out what works and what doesn't work. And you quickly realize, oh, actually, this is totally different at this company or this organization and this process, whatever. Like, it's going to have to change, and we can't junk it. We gotta change and we gotta flow based on the real organizational principles. Is that how it generally works, or is it much more of like someone else agrees that this is the way we're going to do it, and then no one agrees as a team? Like the actual people who have to do the work and actually have to follow the plan are the people who are like, no, this is totally unrealistic.
Yes, it's the latter usually.
Okay.
There's a lot of input. It's very customized to organizations. What works for you? What's the flow? What's the, decision tree for you? But then they say, hey, this person would not be involved in this decision, or we wouldn't even make this decision. It would be sent to the legal team. Something like that wasn't identified when building out the response plan that, as you're exercising it, you won't know exactly how it'll go until you're walking through it and actually stepping through the response itself and saying, hey, you know what? This is actually not the workflow we'd use. We'd escalate at this point rather than this point. So it's usually just trying to figure out, hey, this is what we thought it looked like. This is what it actually looks like. Let's reconcile the difference.
I'm interested, like, when you said the lawyers get involved. I love lawyers. I love lawyers. Too many lawyers in my family. Like, how many times are people who are not technical involved in these plans, in these IR response plans? Like, I would deem a lawyer. No offense, I'm sure there's some great lawyers out there that really know ICS security. I guarantee I know. Guarantee I know it because they've reviewed red lines for me a million times, right? But like, I'm interested, like, how many times is step 5 involving completely non-technical people, public relations, lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. Like, are those things written into these plans as well? And like, how often is that the weird hiccup in the plan that like people are like totally unaware of, or totally weren't aware that they had to involve that?
Absolutely. So that's very common in response plans because you want the communications piece, which often involves the legal team or the PR team, and making sure that all of those are working together. Because if it's a big incident and say there was some information that got out to the public, you want to make a public statement as soon as possible and you want it to be official. So involving those teams during an incident response is very key, especially if you're working with, let's say, you've got supply chain dependencies on you. You want to be able to reach out and say, hey, this is happening, expected delay. So those teams are definitely involved in that planning process. And I'd say, yes, the hiccups can be there for sure, because, it's different for every incident. You don't alert everyone, the whole public, if it's just a small thing that's impacting a few customers.
So the team is bigger than most people think, right? So you've got lawyers, you've got comms, you've got executives of some sort, you've got
government probably. It's a lot of
compliance. Yep.
And then maybe all the rest of the things that we think of, the easy stuff. I'm going to steal Eric's question because I thought it was a good one when we prepped, but talk to us about, and I don't know this either, is talk to us please about run books, playbooks, books, whatever, all these different phraseologies that I've always just conflated in my head to one thing. And you, again, were telling us, no, you're a moron. They're all different. So maybe talk through that ontology again.
Sure,
well, I'll restate my question before. When I hear run books or playbooks, I think, 6 steps, right? Like, check if it's really on, really check if it's really on, restart the thing.
Turn it off and turn it on again.
Yeah. Call the other guy to make sure it's not really on and you're still messed up. Like, walk us through kind of what those in reality look like, because I assume it's not as simple as what I just said.
Yeah, definitely. So the way I look at it is it's a 3-tiered system. So you've got the umbrella, which is the incident response plan, which covers everything. It's that guidance document. It's that blueprint. Then you go a level deeper into the playbook. So those are scenario specific. So your incident response plan will never be scenario specific. It won't be like, if ransomware hits, this is what we'll do. It's an overarching, look at it as an all hazards for OT cybersecurity incident response. So then the playbooks go one level deeper, which is the scenario. So you'll build them out for, let's say, ransomware, HMI manipulation, something of that sort. So that would be the steps based on the incident response plan, a deeper level of those steps. So how would you actually verify that it's ransomware? What would you be doing if it is ransomware? Who would you be coordinating with? At what point would that decision to pay or no pay be involved? That sort of thing. But then you look at a playbook, and that's the most granular level of documentation. So that's the actual step-by-step. This is what you do when you see ransomware. Writing out the actual command line, what you're going to be putting in, and making it so that it is exactly what, start to finish, what you need to do when encountering various technical issues.
So that's I would assume that is a very detailed process in terms of, like, no matter what you're doing, right? Is it is it DCS, is it a PLC based system, is it a Yokogawa or a Honeywell or a Rockwell, all these systems, right? Like the commands, the structures, the processes on all these things have to be taken into account on a technical byte by byte level, but also on like a process level. Like, okay, now it's a Honeywell DCS, but it's using these type of firewalls and these type of switches and these type of routers, and it's using these different servers. Like, all that stuff is I assume that's very precise work, right?
It is, absolutely. And that's why the run books are a much further down the maturity chain activity, so that, once you have that initial documentation, then you can start tackling those technical issues that could come up and what you do with them per system, per process, and that sort of thing.
So let me say that back to you because I'm slow. It's an incident response, it's a playbook, and then it's a run book. But then for each playbook and run book, it might be per plant or even per line. I think we all know very bespoke systems. I mean, to me, I'm just hearing, wow, Mary's gonna really go buy a house in the Bahamas when we're done. So help us with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's OT is just expensive to begin with, but incident management and incident handling can be done in little bite-sized pieces. So just starting with an incident response plan, or even starting with an incident response retainer if you can afford one, just having that third party in place so that if something does happen, you can call them. And having that plan so that you have an idea if something were to go wrong and the, operational troubleshooting is like, hey, this is actually something for real. This isn't just a, system glitch. Then, you have a basic plan in place. That's the key. You want to have at least a little something, and then you can chip away at the rest. And, playbooks, here's a good example of how you can do a playbook. If you're going to exercise your instant response plan through a tabletop, write a playbook based on that tabletop that you did. Or if you do encounter an incident, write a playbook based on the incident that you encountered. So there's ways that you can chip away at things so that it's not this giant, whoa, I need to do all of this immediately. It's an overtime project.
So we touched earlier a little bit on safety, and I want to circle back to that as well as a couple other things. But I always think of this as, gee, it's not turn off the server and turn it back on or do some forensics and make sure it's clean. There's a huge number of interdependencies, and again, people's safety, people's lives in many cases, depend upon this. So maybe you could tell us a story or a general kind of idea of something you've been through that illustrates how we get a plant back up and running, for example, or something like that.
Absolutely. So one that comes to mind is a organization experienced an incident and they had to take their plant down proactively. It was very interesting. And that's something else with the safety piece is sometimes the incident won't actually be in the OT environment, but there is that connection between IT and OT. So there's a proactive shutdown. So you want to make sure that everything is okay before bringing it back online and making that connection. And that's one of those decisions that you want identified in the incident response plan ahead of time. If you're going to shut down a site, who can make that call and why are they making the call? Is it because the OT environment was indeed impacted, or could it be, and is it a proactive? So this one is a proactive one. And so to bring it back up, there was a lot of validation of traffic, making sure that everything was working as it should on the OT level as it was separated. Is there anything funky? Is there anything strange? And then making sure that that IT side is clean, so doing the IT incident response before bringing them back together. But validating that everything is working as it should and validating that everything is clean is the key. So looking at your logs, looking at your forensics, looking at your processes, and making sure that those processes are functioning as expected before bringing back online and reconnecting.
So I'm gonna,
if you can say, how long did that take? What was that? How long did that process, was that weeks? Was that days? Was that months? You talk about startup of a refinery. That's what my experience has been. A lot of startups on refineries, that's a 3-month process, right? It's very, through on the lesser end, right? Was this? This was a long term, or was it a little shorter when you went through the logs and did all the things you're supposed to do?
It can be anywhere from days to months, depending on what happened and what's going on, and if there was an OT impact, or if it was just proactive and you're checking kind of the high levels. So it depends on how deep you're going and how deep you need to go, but it can be anywhere from days to months. But in this situation, since it was a proactive, it ended up being days, able to look at everything, say we're all good, wait for the IT side to finish their eradication, and then recover together.
The thing I just heard you talk about that struck me so much is preparation, which you've said already, right? But I'm going to be the eternal pessimist here and say, oh, okay, well, that's great. If you have a baseline or if you do know what's supposed to talk to what, that's great. In my experience, that's not very often the case, So it's that much more work, right? It gets to be that much more expensive. Maybe say a few words about that.
Absolutely. So looking at OT security in general, the best way to do it is to look at the 5 critical controls of SANS. So one of those is the defensible architecture. And so part of that is knowing what your asset inventory is, knowing what's sitting on your network, because so many organizations are like, we just don't know what's sitting there. We just have no, awareness, which happens. These organizations have these sites that are very old, and there's been, piecemeal replacements over time, if there have been replacements of equipment. And so, it's hard to gather everything. So making sure that you have an asset inventory and doing an asset discovery. And then another big step is that visibility and monitoring. So making sure that you have visibility into your network of some sort. Do you have traffic logs? Are you able to collect PCAPs? Do you have a tool in place that can help you with visibility? So making sure that you have these things in place. OT security is they're all interconnected, all of the pieces, all of the steps. So there's things that you'll want to do ahead of an actual incident, and that would include that visibility and that discovery.
You said one of my favorite, very vague words there. Eric laughs because he knows what I'm going to say next. Visibility, right? I mean, it's an overused and poorly defined words, and I'm kind of a word nerd. So to me, visibility usually means, with most of my previous and even current customers, visibility means what you said, asset inventory. To me, it means I need an extremely detailed and very well thought out and defined network visibility, right? What traffic goes where, what types of packets. To me, and again, I'm coming from a long and horrible, experience in networking. Talk about baselines for a second, because that's my favorite thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think visibility can go to that degree, but so many organizations aren't there yet. So many organizations aren't at the point where they can say, hey, all of these systems talk to this system. Here's where we are. And that's something that organizations are working towards, but starting at the very, very basic of just knowing what's on the network is the key. And then working your way up with visibility. There's a crawl, walk, run, process for everything, and visibility is included in that. And having baselines is very important. Making sure you know what you're supposed to be seeing, making sure, hey, this is what I can compare this against. When something is strange, we go to the baseline and say, hey, you know what? This value is indeed off. Something's wrong. Let's initiate an event and maybe even escalate it to an incident.
Okay. Well, you're walking right into all my traps here.
All the traps, yeah.
You said one of my favorites, which I'm not knocking you for saying, but crawl, walk, run. Please tell us, what is that in general? What does that look like? What does crawl, what does walk, what does run look like in your mind as an extremely experienced IR expert? Let's hear it.
So crawl is just kind of getting something in place, that instant response plan, that retainer if you can afford it.
Okay.
Walk would be doing
and I'm going to stop you there, because I'm an engineer, and therefore I'm arrogant, and I think I know everything. As I think I told you earlier, I took the SANS incident response, which is very IT oriented, about 30 years ago. So hell, I can do that myself, right?
You could. Every organization. Yeah.
I couldn't. I really couldn't. But okay, thanks for saying that. I guess what I'm trying to prompt you to say is, gee, that's a very dangerous tightrope to walk out on, Dwayne. Why do you think you're arrogant enough to build an IR plan?
Honestly, I think that even if an engineer builds out an IR plan that somewhat has the information that's needed, that's a great start. Just starting with something. So if an engineer does take it upon themselves to build out, a very basic piecemeal incident response plan, then I'm for it, because at least there's a structure to responding to that incident. So.
And we're all about stretching ourselves here at Radio Hour. I mean, that would be maybe a great way to move into some areas that you haven't before, right? Stretch yourself, walk out into the unknown, and maybe make a name for yourself somewhere.
Right.
Or
it's a good exercise regardless. Right.
Yeah. Or you can crash and burn in a horrible way. But either way,
you learn a lot by crashing and burn. I learn to crash and burn all the time.
Yeah.
You know what's cool about that idea is you'll also be interacting with teams that you might not normally, the engineer might not be interacting with the SOC on a regular basis, but to build out, hey, this is how we reach each other in the middle of the night, you'd be building those relationships, having those conversations ahead of time so that they know who you are, they know everyone knows who everyone is. It's not strangers talking to strangers when an incident hits. So I do think that that's a great idea. Just starting off somewhere, and even more basic, starting off with who would be in the roles that would respond to an incident. Just mapping that. Who would do this? Who would do that? Who would do operations? Who would do the incident command? Taking that step is a huge deal because you actually have a structure then of how to respond. Even if it's not step by step, this is what I do if I get hit by ransomware. These are the commands I'd type in. You know who to call, and you can all work together in that.
So if that's crawl, what's walk? Or is that, well, wait a minute, is that crawl? Is everything we just talked about kind of crawl?
Yeah, that instant
Okay, so what's
response plan.
walk?
Crawl is impressive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That's a
2
pretty
years from
impressive
now,
crawl.
when we've made our knees and elbows bloody, what do we do next to walk? Yeah.
Walking would be that instant response playbook with this scenario specific. So bringing it down even further to, hey, this is something that either my industry peers have experienced, this is something that I've seen, or this is a known threat to my industry, and taking that and making it a playbook. So going deeper, a step deeper than the instant response plan. So that ransomware scenario.
Okay. And then run is, I'm guessing, the run book thing.
Run actually would be tabletops. So
Table.
that would be
Okay.
exercising that. And the way I look at the crawl, walk, run structure is it's just a cycle. So once you do
Okay.
that tabletop, once you exercise it, you start from the beginning at instant response plans, but you have it in place already, so it's updates. So it's a lot smoother of a process. And then once you reach that run and once you're starting to do that cycle, then you can build out the run books. But focusing on those three areas, the instant response plan, playbooks, and then exercising them are the main
Okay.
ways to
And
build that
and
material.
that's then when I call I think of tabletops as like the old Dungeon and Dragons. As a disclaimer, it's a game I've never played. But I think about the people sitting around in a circle on a table and having Mary say, you've opened the magic door and horrible things fly out. What are you going to do next? Is that a tabletop, or there's those cards, those decks of cards that are for tabletops? Give us an insight into that. Have you run those? Can you help us understand that? Okay.
Yeah, I've done hundreds and hundreds of OT tabletops. So
Wow.
the
Cool.
way I like to go about them is with an organization, taking a look at what's in their environment, possibly vulnerabilities if they have any sort of tracking, and using a real attack path to build out the tabletop exercise. What could actually happen in your environment? I don't want it to just be you were hit with ransomware, generic, how would you respond? I want it to be something that would actually happen in their environment so that it's realistic for them. And then we'd walk through, it depends on who the audience is. It could be an executive audience, like you get a call that this is happening. They're asking to, escalate it to an incident if the executive team is involved in that decision, depending on the organization. Or executive team, we need you to call, the board and everyone needs to be on standby because we're responding to this. So actually walking through that through the executive side or the technical side, which is the operations. What would you do if you saw this weird alert and you were locked out of your system, you couldn't log back in, everyone's starting to get locked out of the same HMI system, engineering workstation, what have you, and now supervisor credentials don't work. What do you do in that situation?
Now, you were very kind before. I think this is definitely the kind of thing where you call the electrician, right? Nobody wants to be playing with 240 or whatever. To me, this sounds like this is where we call somebody like you or you, and they do a bunch of prep work, right? I guess I also think about like you're painting a room, 90% of it's prep work.
Yes.
So say a few words about that. This doesn't sound like something for the faint of heart.
Absolutely. So it's a multi-step preparation. The actual execution of the tabletop is the second to last piece. The last piece is actually taking those findings, writing them all out, and identifying areas of improvement. But working from the way back, it's identifying what's the audience first and foremost. Who's the target for this, tabletop? Is it the technical team? Is it a site? Is it a SOC trying to work with the technical team? Is it the executive team? Is it, a vendor that you know that you'll be working with? Are they included? So kind of rolling into step two, who's going to be involved? And then what kind of scenario is not just realistic, but would cause team players to think? What would they do if this were to happen? Rather than just giving some random, this would happen. Finding something that actually matters to them. Like, hey, this site could be shut down and locked out, and you could have a loss of view or loss of control. What would happen then? And also making sure that the exercise is based on the organization's maturity. You don't want it to be too simple for an organization, and you don't want it to be too hard. So it's not just them saying, hey, we're at this maturity level, give us what you got. It's actually talking to them and being like, you're not there. Because you don't want crickets in a tabletop, and you also don't want it geared to one person so that the rest of the room is quiet and one person is answering all the questions. You want to make sure that you're involving all the teams, all the parties, everyone that should be talking has the opportunity to talk so that they can execute it functionally.
That's probably quite hard, because in my experience, there's always that one or two people who are
Yes.
like, we are the masters of the system. Particularly in OT, where you've got a limited number of people who really truly design and run these systems anyway. I assume that's probably quite hard to run that type of exercise.
Definitely. It's a healthy challenge, but there's ways that you can involve other teams. You kind of listen I usually have a chart of who's who and what they do. And I'm like, hey, Joe, can you tell me what you'd be doing in this situation? Hey, Steve, what would
Crying
you
in
be
the
doing?
corner.
Yeah, exactly.
I call Ralph, who retired 2 years ago. Oh, but yeah,
Hey, whatever you got to do. If you're
yeah.
calling Ralph better be on that document that incident response plan.
Ralph passed away. Sorry. So this is great. This is solid gold. I want to be mindful of both your time, and we usually put a half hour on this. Maybe help us close out by saying what else could you tell us that we didn't ask? I again really appreciate everything you said. It's certainly I've learned a lot. I hope our 7 audience members have. Tell us some stuff that we didn't ask yet.
Absolutely. So, main thing is just having something in place is better than nothing. So, whether that's a plan, whether that's a document, whether that's identifying people, and knowing what to do if something were to happen. Do you have a retainer in place? Are you unable to afford a retainer? So, what kind of free resources are available in your country for responding to an incident that could help you? Do you have your vendor contacts? Do you have all of that information you want to have ahead of time? So just an information gathering piece is key. And then you want to make sure that you're resilient. So are you able to come back up if something were to happen? Have you backed up your HMIs? Have you backed up your PLCs? Do you have that information in place? Do you have source control? Do you have any of that going on? And if you don't, how would you be able to get to that point slowly over time? Not rushing it, not being like 0 to 100 immediately. What can you do to get there over time? Chip away at it, little bits.
I'll tell you my briefest story. One of the ways you recover is when all your machines are ransomware. Is you pay a lot of different people to walk around and back up your PLCs via the USB port. So that's a great incident response plan right there. Eric, anything else? I think we've.
No, this is great. I mean, we always like to focus a little bit on development. I think we've talked a lot about like ways that people can, maybe make 1 or 2 steps to really make themselves, known in their organization. One, to like maybe just start taking these initial, maybe the very earliest of the crawl stages, like, and then certainly bring in thresholds when the thresholds are when you run out your rope. But out of interest, like, have you seen people in your time that have worked well with you or your teams, and then they've kind of made themselves maybe a little more important in the organization, or maybe they've made themselves a little more critical to their job by doing some of this work?
Absolutely, for sure. You know, there's often, especially in OT environments, there's someone that knows a lot. There's a lot of institutional and tribal knowledge. So taking that and being able to apply it to, hey, this is how we'd handle this, this is what we do. Even if you just have a little bit of that knowledge, being able to put pen to paper and saying, this is what the process looks like. This is what we're doing without writing it down and without, we're just verbalizing it or we're just going through it because that's exactly how we've been doing it. Putting pen to paper is going to help you. And I've seen that help folks, either rise up or become a critical member of that instant response team because they said, hey, let's put this process down and make sure everyone can follow it and that it's repeatable. So absolutely.
Awesome, that's great. Well, this has been awesome. Like I said, I think we'd love to have you back. We should get like some very specific things to talk about when we come back. But I think this is a great intro to what you do. A terrible intro to me and Dwayne because I'm sure people will actually watch this versus our normal shows. No, really appreciate it. This has been great. Dwayne, anything else?
Well, this is normally where I say you've wasted a perfectly good half hour, but I can't imagine anyone interested in the topic wasting any time here. Mary, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back. And I think that's everything we need for today.
This has been the ICS Radio Security Hour, half hour with me, Eric.
Me, Dwayne.
And the best part of the show,
Mary.
All right. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, guys.